Hey there, incredible viewers! You're in for a story that will shake the very foundation of leadership. A coffee shop bustling with customers, employees rushing to keep up, but beneath the surface, frustration, exhaustion, and mistreatment. Nathan Hayes, the owner of a growing coffee chain, knew something was wrong. Instead of relying on reports, he put on an apron, stepped behind the counter, and saw the truth for himself. What he discovered wasn't just poor service. It was a toxic culture, threatening to destroy everything he built. But what he did next, that's where true leadership is tested. Stay with us, because this journey of accountability, courage, and redemption will leave you speechless. Nathan Hayes had always prided himself on building Brew Haven from the ground up. What started as a small artisanal coffee shop in his hometown had grown into a beloved regional chain with 15 locations. His mission was simple: serve high-quality coffee while fostering a warm, welcoming atmosphere. But lately, something felt off. Reports of declining customer satisfaction had been piling up, and the most troubling complaints came from one specific location in a small college town. Customers described rude employees, sluggish service, and an unsettling pattern of elderly patrons being ignored or dismissed. The numbers showed declining sales, but the reports alone weren't enough to tell him why. Nathan had always believed in hands-on leadership, but as the company grew, he had become more removed from daily operations. He trusted his store managers to uphold the values he built the company on, yet the rising complaints suggested a serious breakdown in leadership. He couldn't afford to rely solely on corporate reports anymore. He needed to see it for himself. Determined to uncover the truth, Nathan decided to go undercover as an entry-level barista at the struggling location. It wasn't the first time he had worked behind a counter, but this time it wouldn't be as the boss. He shaved off his neatly trimmed beard, traded in his tailored suits for a simple barista uniform, and wore thick glasses and a beanie to alter his appearance. His new name tag read Nate, just another new hire blending into the team. Most of his employees had never met him in person, making it easy to remain anonymous. This particular cafe had been underperforming for months, and Nathan suspected the store manager, Brandon Watts, was part of the problem. Complaints about his poor attitude, mistreatment of employees, and dismissive behavior toward customers had surfaced multiple times. Nathan wanted to find out whether these claims were exaggerated or if the issue ran deeper than corporate oversight suggested. On his first morning at the cafe, he took a deep breath before stepping through the glass doors. The scent of coffee filled the air, but instead of the cozy, inviting energy Brew Haven was known for, he immediately sensed tension. Employees moved quickly but avoided eye contact, and conversations were kept hushed and brief. The atmosphere felt off, almost as if people were walking on eggshells. Nathan was greeted by Sophie Lane, the assistant manager. She looked tired but kind, her expression carrying the exhaustion of someone who had been carrying more weight than her title suggested. "Welcome to the team, Nate," she said, forcing a smile while handing him an apron. "We're short-staffed today, so it's going to be a little hectic." Nathan nodded, playing along. "I'll do my best." Sophie hesitated for a second before adding, "If you hear Brandon say anything, just ignore him." Nathan's stomach tightened. That wasn't a good sign. Nathan tied his apron and took his place behind the counter, watching carefully as the cafe came to life. The morning rush was just beginning, and already he could sense the underlying stress in the air. Customers lined up, some impatiently tapping their phones, others chatting softly. The baristas worked swiftly, but their movements felt tense, as if they were anticipating something or someone. He didn't have to wait long. A sharp voice cut through the cafe. "Why is this taking so long?" Nathan turned to see a stocky man with a permanent scowl striding toward the counter. Brandon Watts, the store manager. Even before he reached them, the employees stiffened, shoulders tensing. Nathan could see it, the nervous glances exchanged, the hurried movements, the way everyone avoided eye contact with their boss. Brandon hovered near the counter, arms crossed, watching Nathan ring up a customer. A young woman, probably a college student, ordered a caramel latte and handed over cash. Nathan smoothly counted the change and offered a polite, "Thanks for stopping by." Brandon scoffed. "You're too slow. Speed it up or customers will leave." Nathan barely had time to respond before the next customer stepped up. A frail, elderly man with thick glasses and a careful gait. He wore a beige cardigan and clutched his wallet with slightly trembling hands. "Good morning," Nathan greeted him warmly. "What can I get started for you?" The man smiled, clearly appreciative of the friendly tone. "A small black coffee, please." Nathan rang it up as the elderly customer fumbled with his change, counting carefully. It took him a moment to separate the coins. Brandon sighed loudly behind him. "Here we go again." Nathan's fingers clenched around the register. He turned slightly to glance at Brandon, who rolled his eyes as the man continued counting. "These old folks take forever," Brandon muttered, though not quietly enough. "Always short on cash, always holding up the line. Someone needs to tell them to use a damn app or shop somewhere else." Nathan felt a sharp twist of anger in his gut. He glanced at the elderly customer, who had heard every word. The man's face fell, his hands trembling slightly as he tried to hurry. "I'm sorry," he murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. Nathan caught Sophie watching, her expression pained but silent. She didn't speak up, didn't challenge Brandon. Neither did the other baristas, all of whom seemed too afraid to interfere. Nathan forced a reassuring smile as he gently took the change from the man's hands. "No rush at all, sir. Take your time." The elderly man gave him a grateful nod, clutching his coffee tightly as he shuffled to a nearby seat. Brandon shook his head, laughing under his breath. "You'll learn, kid. These seniors slow everything down and they're barely worth the business." Nathan wanted to snap right then and there, but he knew he needed to see just how deep this rot ran, so he stayed quiet. For now. As the shift went on, Nathan continued watching how Brandon managed the café, or rather, how he didn't. It was Sophie who kept everything running, juggling customer service, stock orders, and employee scheduling. The baristas worked efficiently, but they seemed constantly on edge, their heads snapping up whenever Brandon walked by. Nathan noticed another disturbing pattern. The break schedule was posted on the back wall, along with shift assignments for the week. At first glance, it seemed normal, but the pattern was clear. Certain employees were getting the worst shifts, while others had inconsistent hours that made it impossible to plan their lives. And those with the worst schedules? The older employees, the quieter ones, the ones who didn't laugh at Brandon's cruel jokes. Meanwhile, Brandon's favorites, younger workers who played along with his arrogant attitude, always had the best schedules. Nathan's jaw tightened. During his break, Nathan sat in the small, cramped employee lounge, pretending to scroll through his phone. The other baristas were talking quietly, voices low. "I can't keep doing this," one of them muttered. "Brandon cut my hours again. But Mark gets full shifts every week. How is that fair?" "It's not," another barista sighed. "And did you hear what he said to Mrs. Jensen earlier? She's been coming here for years, and he told her she should shop online instead of wasting space." Nathan's grip tightened on his coffee cup. "I'd quit if I could," the first barista admitted, "but everywhere else is just as bad." Nathan glanced toward Sophie, who sat in the corner, staring at her coffee like it might give her strength. She looked absolutely drained. The door suddenly swung open and the conversation died instantly. Brandon walked in. Everyone stiffened, some pretending to check their phones. Brandon smirked. "Why so quiet?" No one answered. He grabbed a soda from the fridge, then turned to Sophie. "By the way, I need you to cover tomorrow morning. Greg called out." Sophie blinked. "But I already opened today and I'm scheduled to close tomorrow." "Not my problem," Brandon cut her off. "Figure it out." Sophie pressed her lips together and nodded. Without another word, she grabbed a mop and headed back out. Nathan had seen enough. That afternoon, as Nathan worked the register, another elderly woman, Mrs. Jensen, approached. She smiled warmly, her hands wrapped around the handle of her purse. "Good afternoon, dear," she greeted him. "I'd like my usual decaf blend, please." Nathan smiled back. "Of course. Coming right up." Before he could ring it in, Brandon appeared. "We don't have time for special requests," he said, loud enough for customers to hear. "Why don't you just grab a can of coffee from the grocery store instead?" Nathan saw the flicker of hurt in the woman's eyes as she hesitated. "Oh, I didn't mean to be a bother." Nathan's blood boiled. "It's no bother at all, ma'am," he said firmly. "I'll make sure you get exactly what you need." Mrs. Jensen smiled at him gratefully, but Nathan could feel Brandon's glare drilling into his back. "You're wasting time, Nate," Brandon sneered. Nathan turned, meeting Brandon's arrogant smirk with a cold, unwavering stare. He was done playing along. Tonight the disguise would come off. Tomorrow, Brandon would be gone. Nathan arrived at the cafe the next morning, but this time he wasn't wearing his barista uniform. No more disguise, no more playing along. He walked in with purpose, scanning the cafe floor as employees bustled around, trying to keep up with the morning rush. Brandon was already there, leaning against the counter, barking orders at a nervous stock clerk who was fumbling with a crate of coffee beans. Sophie was at the register, looking exhausted but focused, while the other baristas worked with visible tension in their shoulders. Nathan didn't hesitate. He walked straight into Brandon's office without knocking. Brandon looked up from his desk, annoyed, his face twisted into a scowl. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" he snapped. Nathan closed the door behind him, his expression calm but firm. "We need to talk." Brandon scoffed, setting down his coffee. "You don't just walk into my office, kid. Get back to the counter before I write you up." Nathan took off his glasses, then removed his fake name tag and set it on the desk. Brandon frowned, confused at first, but then realization dawned. Nathan met his gaze. "I'm Nathan Hayes." His voice was steady. "I own this company." Brandon's face drained of color. His mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. Nathan didn't give him a chance to recover. "I spent the last 2 days working in this cafe, watching how you run things, and I have to say, I'm disgusted." Brandon swallowed hard. "Sir, Save it," Nathan cut him off. His tone was sharp but controlled. "I heard how you talk about customers. I saw how you treat employees. You mock elderly patrons, you cut hours for workers you don't like, and you force Sophie to run this store while you hide in your office." He stepped forward. "And worst of all, you've created a work environment where people are too afraid to speak up." Brandon's expression hardened, and for a moment his arrogance flickered back. "With all due respect," he sneered, "you don't know what it's like to run this place. I do what I have to do to keep things moving." Nathan's jaw clenched, but he refused to raise his voice. "You think mistreating customers and employees is keeping things moving?" Brandon leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, his confidence returning. "These employees should be grateful they have jobs. If they can't handle it, they can leave. Simple as that." Nathan exhaled slowly, keeping his rage in check. "That's exactly the problem. You think this is about power. It's not. It's about respect. And I will not have someone like you running one of my cafes." Brandon's smirk faltered. "Wait, you can't just—" "Yes, I can, and I just did." Brandon's face turned bright red. "This is ridiculous. You don't know how hard it is to find managers willing to deal with this kind of work." Nathan's voice remained icy and firm. "I'll take my chances." He stepped aside and gestured toward the door. "Get your things and leave. Now." Brandon glared at him, his face twisted with fury, but he knew he had no choice. He grabbed his coat, muttering curses under his breath, and stormed out of the office. Nathan followed him onto the cafe floor. Employees stopped what they were doing, staring as Brandon stomped toward the exit. At the doorway, Brandon turned back, sneering at the staff. "Good luck without me. This place is a mess. You'll see." And then he was gone. For a moment, the cafe was silent. Employees exchanged uncertain glances, some still shocked, others looking at Nathan with cautious hope. Nathan stepped forward, his tone firm but reassuring. "I know this is a shock, but let me be clear. This cafe is not a mess. You all have been doing your jobs under terrible leadership. That changes today." Sophie's eyes were wide with disbelief. "Wait, who are you?" Nathan turned to her. "Nathan Hayes, I own this company, and I've been working undercover to see what's really been happening here." A ripple of whispers spread through the cafe. The baristas exchanged glances, trying to process what they had just heard. Sophie's mouth opened, then closed. You were the new guy?" Nathan nodded. "And I saw everything. How you held this place together, how Brandon treated all of you, how customers were ignored or mistreated. That ends now." A stock clerk hesitantly raised his hand. "Does this mean things are going to change?" Nathan met his gaze. "Yes, immediately." He turned to Sophie. "I need to talk to you in the office." Sophie tensed, looking like she expected bad news, but she nodded and followed him inside. Nathan sat across from her, his voice gentler now. "I've seen how hard you work, Sophie. You've been running this place without any recognition, and that's going to change." Sophie frowned. "What do you mean?" Nathan leaned forward. "I want you to take over as the cafe's new manager." Her eyes widened. "Me? But You've already been doing the job," Nathan assured her. "Now you'll have the authority to do it right." Sophie's hands trembled slightly. I don't know if I can." Nathan gave her a small smile. "You already have been. You just didn't have the title." She took a deep breath, then slowly nodded. "Okay." Nathan stood up. "Good. Let's go fix this cafe." For the first time since Nathan had arrived, the store felt lighter. Employees moved with purpose instead of fear. And as Nathan watched Sophie step into her new leadership role, he knew he had made the right decision. Nathan stepped out of the office with Sophie by his side, ready to set things in motion. The cafe was still buzzing with hushed conversations, employees whispering about what had just happened. He could see the mixture of skepticism and cautious optimism in their faces. Change had been promised before, but it had never lasted. This time, Nathan was determined to prove it wouldn't be just words. Standing near the registers, he clapped his hands to get everyone's attention. "Listen up," he said, his voice carrying a steady confidence. "Brandon is gone, Sophie is your new manager, and starting today, we're making some big changes." A few employees exchanged wary glances. One barista, Luis, crossed his arms and spoke up. "No offense, but we've heard this before. Every time management changes, they say things will get better, but nothing ever does." Nathan nodded, expecting the pushback. "I get it. Words don't mean anything unless there's action behind them. So let me show you what's changing, starting right now." He turned to the break schedule taped on the back wall, the one he had studied the day before. "No more favoritism in shift assignments. Everyone gets a fair, predictable schedule. That means no one is stuck with the worst shifts, week after week, while others get a free pass." A murmur ran through the team. A few baristas exchanged surprised looks. Was this actually happening? Nathan continued, "Breaks will be enforced. No one should be working for 6 or 7 hours straight without a moment to breathe. That stops today." A barista near the espresso machine, Emma, raised an eyebrow. "And what about customer treatment? Because I've seen people like Mrs. Jensen and Mr. Lawson get pushed aside like they don't matter." Nathan's expression hardened. "That will never happen again. Every customer who walks in here, young or old, deserves to be treated with respect. If I ever hear about an elderly customer being rushed or dismissed again, I'll personally make sure it doesn't happen a second time." That got their attention. There was a subtle shift in the energy of the room, like the weight of Brandon's toxic influence was finally lifting. Nathan turned to Sophie. "You've already been running this place despite Brandon, not because of him. Now you'll have the authority to make things better. I trust you to rebuild what he broke." Sophie still looked stunned, as if she was waiting for the catch. I don't know what to say." Nathan gave her a reassuring nod. "Just say yes." She took a deep breath, then squared her shoulders. Yes. For the first time since Nathan had arrived, a genuine sense of hope flickered in the employee's eyes. But Nathan wasn't done yet. "Sophie won't be doing this alone," he turned to the team. "I'm bringing in one of our best managers, Grace Miller, from another location to mentor Sophie for the next few months. She's going to help make sure the transition is smooth and that the cafe is running the way it's supposed to." Sophie exhaled slowly, clearly relieved to have support. The employees started nodding, some still hesitant but beginning to believe that real change was coming. Nathan looked around the cafe, seeing it with new eyes. The space itself wasn't broken. It was the culture that had been poisoned. That poison was gone now. He took a deep breath. "I know this won't be an overnight fix. I know trust isn't rebuilt in a day, but I promise you this. I'm listening now, and I won't stop." A beat of silence, then one of the cashiers, Megan, started clapping. Slowly, others joined in. It wasn't an explosive celebration, but it was something just as important, a sign of cautious optimism. Nathan smiled, knowing the real work had just begun. Nathan left the cafe that evening with a renewed sense of purpose. This wasn't just about fixing one location, it was about fixing the culture of his entire company. Brew Haven had strayed from the values he built it on, and he refused to let that continue. The next morning, instead of heading to his corporate office, he drove to another high-performing cafe, one with great customer feedback and a strong team environment. He wanted to see what was working there, to compare it to what had gone wrong under Brandon's management. It didn't take long to see the difference. The employees moved with confidence, the manager was hands-on and supportive, and customers were greeted with genuine warmth. When an elderly man took extra time at the counter counting his change, the barista patiently waited, smiling and chatting with him instead of rushing him. Nathan knew then, this was how Brew Haven was supposed to feel. Back at corporate, he wasted no time calling an emergency meeting with his district managers. He laid everything out. The toxic leadership at the failing store, the mistreatment of employees and customers, and the changes that needed to happen immediately. New policies were put in place. Store evaluations would no longer be based solely on sales. Employee satisfaction, customer experience, and leadership quality would be just as important. Quarterly, anonymous employee feedback surveys would be required to prevent toxic leadership from going unnoticed. Nathan himself would start visiting stores unannounced, ensuring his values were upheld at every level. That evening, he received a message from Sophie. First full day as manager. Staff is still adjusting, but things already feel different. Thank you for believing in me. Nathan smiled. This was just the beginning. Nathan Hayes' story is a powerful reminder that true leadership isn't about authority, it's about integrity, empathy, and action. When he stepped into his own business at ground level, he didn't just see a struggling workplace, he saw real people, undervalued and unheard, trying their best in a system that had failed them. Toxic management, fear, and favoritism had drained the very spirit of his company. But instead of turning away, Nathan chose to listen, take responsibility, and make real changes. By empowering the right people and restoring trust, he rebuilt not just his business, but the culture it stood for. The lesson? Success isn't about profits alone. It's about how you uplift those who make it possible. Because great leadership begins with seeing, respecting, and valuing people.